The torches along the grand corridor of Spire Castle burned lower than usual that night, as if even the flames sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. Sadie adjusted the clasp of her cloak one final time before stepping through the iron doors of the great hall. The garment was deep green, the color of pine trees in early winter, and every stitch of it had been sewn by her own hands over 3 weeks of careful, patient work. She had used the last of the good wool her mother had left her, the last thing of value she still owned. She had not thought twice about it. Tonight was worth every thread. The hall was already full when she entered. Long tables draped in dark linen ran from wall to wall, crowded with warriors, nobles, and emissaries from neighboring packs. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling. The iron wolf crest of the Spire pack, a silver wolf mid-leap against a field of black, swaying gently in the heat rising from dozens of iron braziers. The smell of roasted game, aged wine, and burning pine filled the air, thick and warm and ancient. Somewhere near the far wall, a group of musicians played a slow melody on strings and bone flutes. Sadie moved through the crowd carefully, chin up, dark eyes scanning the room. She was not noble. She had never been noble. Her father had been a gamma of middling rank who died when she was 14, leaving her and her younger sister Marin with a small house at the edge of the village and not much else. She had no title, no pack standing, no powerful family name to announce her when she entered a room. What she had was Cale's promise. Cale Dawnmere, son of the pack's high steward, had courted her for nearly a year. He was handsome, well-spoken, and charming enough that half the women in the village had watched their courtship with barely concealed envy. 3 nights ago, in the small garden behind her house, he had held her hands and told her that tonight, at the gathering of the crescent moon, the most important social ceremony in the Spire calendar, he would present her to the court as his chosen mate. He would say her name aloud in front of everyone. He would make it official and permanent. "You deserve to be seen, Sadie," he had told her, and his eyes had looked completely honest. She had believed him. She found her place near the left side of the room, beside a stone pillar wrapped in ivy, and waited. Marin had wanted to come. Sadie had told her to stay home. The invitation had been informal, the situation delicate, and she had not wanted her younger sister caught in an awkward moment if the evening became complicated. Now, standing alone among a crowd of people who barely registered her existence, she wished she had let Marin come anyway. The main doors at the far end of the hall opened with a sound like a held breath releasing. Aiden Voss entered the room. The Lycan King moved the way very powerful men always move, without effort, without theater, and without any visible awareness of the effect he created. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark tunic with the iron wolf crest embroidered in silver thread at the chest. His hair was nearly black, cut short at the sides. His eyes, which Sadie had only ever seen from a distance, were a shade of gray that looked almost colorless in firelight. He was flanked by 2 of his commanders and followed by his personal guard, but none of them drew a single gaze. Every eye in the room followed him and nothing else. Sadie had seen Aiden Voss exactly 4 times in her life, always from far away, always in passing. He ruled Spire and the 3 surrounding territories with a combination of military precision and an authority so natural it never needed to raise its voice. He was 29 years old, unmated, and the subject of more whispered conversations in the village than any other person alive. She was not here for him. She reminded herself of that clearly and turned her attention back to the tables near the center of the room, searching for Cale. She found him quickly. He was standing near the head table, dressed in his finest, a deep burgundy tunic, his light brown hair combed back neatly. He was laughing at something the man beside him said, relaxed and easy, in a way that made Sadie exhale with relief. He looked good. He looked happy. This was going to be fine. Then the woman beside him moved, and Sadie saw her properly for the first time. She was tall, fair-haired, dressed in a gown of pale gold that caught every point of light in the room. She wore a delicate circlet of hammered silver at her brow, a noble's ornament, not an affectation. Her name, Sadie would learn later, was Petra Ashfall, eldest daughter of Lord Ashfall of the Northern Heights. She had arrived in Ironspire only 5 days ago, accompanying her father for the gathering. She was beautiful in the precise, composed way that made rooms rearrange themselves around her. Cale's hand rested at the small of her back. Sadie went very still. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself he was simply being courteous to a guest, that standing close to someone at a crowded gathering was not a declaration, that she was reading disaster into a gesture that had an obvious and innocent explanation. She was good at talking herself into calm. She had been doing it since she was 14 years old. Then the High Steward, Cale's father, rose from his seat at the head table. The room quieted. The High Steward was a large, deliberate man who had the voice of someone accustomed to being heard without effort. He raised his cup and spoke the traditional words of the Crescent Moon gathering. Gratitude to the king for his protection, to the warriors for their service, to the moon herself for her guidance. Then, as was custom, he moved to the announcement of new bonds. "My son Cale," the High Steward said, "has chosen to honor this gathering with the declaration of a formal courtship. He has chosen well, and chosen wisely, as a Dawnmere should." Sadie's hand found the stone pillar beside her. "He presents to this court and to our king, the Lady Petra Ashfall of the Northern Heights, as his intended." The applause was immediate and warm. Someone near Sadie laughed with genuine delight. Across the room, Cale raised his cup toward his father and smiled, easy, untroubled, the smile of a man who had made a decision he was completely comfortable with and had not lost a single night of sleep over it. He did not look toward the pillar on the left side of the room. He did not look for her at all. Sadie stood completely still for a moment that stretched longer than it had any right to. The music resumed. The crowd returned to its conversations. Someone bumped past her without apology, reaching for a cup of wine on the table nearby. She breathed. She let go of the pillar. She was not going to weep. Not here. Not in front of 300 people who would not even register her name. She was not going to cross the room and demand an explanation. Was not going to make herself a scene that people would retell at this same gathering next year with amused shakes of their heads. Remember that village girl who caused a scene when Cale Dawnmere chose Lady Ashfall? She had too much dignity for that. She had nothing else of value in this room, but she still had that. She turned toward the door. She had taken perhaps 7 steps when she heard it, a shift in the sound of the room. Not a silence exactly, but a reorientation. Conversations pausing mid-sentence. The faint but unmistakable alteration in a crowd's attention. She did not stop walking. "You're leaving early." The voice came from her left, low and even and entirely unhurried. She stopped despite herself. 3 men stood slightly apart from the nearest group of nobles, not blocking her path, not positioned with any obvious intent. Simply there in a way that had not been there a moment before. The one who had spoken was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her with open, unashamed curiosity. He had red gold hair and a soldier's build, and a half-smile that suggested he found most situations at least mildly entertaining. Beside him stood a taller man, darker-featured, who was watching her with an expression of precise, calibrated assessment, saying nothing, missing nothing. And beside that man stood Aiden Voss. The Lycan King was not looking at her with pity. He was not looking at her with the particular careful blankness that powerful people used when they wanted to pretend they had not witnessed something uncomfortable. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has just correctly identified after a long search, with a quiet, settled recognition that had no performance in it at all. Sadie held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked back at the red-haired man who had spoken. "The evening is finished," she said. Her voice was steady. She was grateful for that. "For some people," the red-haired man agreed cheerfully. "It hasn't started yet for others." The dark-featured man beside him made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly suppressed. Aiden said nothing. He continued to watch her with that same unreadable, undisturbed attention, and something about it, not threatening, not intrusive, simply present, made the back of her neck feel warm in a way she did not have the capacity to examine right now. "Good night," Sadie said, to no one in particular, and walked out of the great hall. The cold air of the corridor hit her face. She kept walking until she reached the outer gate, and then the road, and then the darkness between the torches, and she did not stop or slow or let her shoulders fall until she was certain she was alone. Then she pressed her back against the cold stone wall of a baker's closed stall and stared up at the winter sky for a long time. The cloak she had made was still warm around her shoulders. She had sewn every stitch of it herself, and it had taken 3 weeks, and she had used the last of her mother's good wool. She thought about that for a while. Then she thought about the look in Aiden Voss's eyes. Not pity, not curiosity, something else. Something she did not have a word for. And she made a decision. She was going to leave Iron Spire, and she was never going to need any of them. She left before dawn. Maren was awake when Sadie returned home that night, sitting beside the dying fire with a candle and a piece of mending she had not actually been working on. She took one look at her sister's face and set the mending down without a word. Sadie told her everything in the quiet, measured way she told most difficult things. Plainly, without embellishment, without asking for comfort she did not know how to receive. Maren listened without interrupting. When Sadie finished, her younger sister was quiet for a long moment, staring at the low flame. "Where will you go?" Maren asked. "East," Sadie said. "There are trade routes through the Ashvin Valley. I know enough about cloth and goods to find work with a merchant company. After that, I don't know yet, but away from here. I'm coming with you." "You're not." Sadie said it firmly, and before Maren could argue, she continued. "You have Bren. You have a life that is working. I am not going to pull you out of it because mine isn't." Maren's eyes filled, which she clearly resented. She blinked it away with the particular stubbornness they had both inherited from their mother. "You'll send word. Every time I reach somewhere new. Promise me. I promise." They sat together by the fire until the last of the wood burned down to coals. In the gray hour before sunrise, Sadie packed a single travel sack, wool blankets, dried provisions, her mother's small copper brooch, a knife, and every coin she had saved over 4 years of mending, weaving, and selling cloth at the village market. It was not much. It was enough to start. She did not look back at the house when she left. She had learned early in life that looking back made things harder without making them better. 3 years passed. The first year was the hardest, as first years generally are. Sadie found work with a merchant caravan moving wool and dyed cloth between the valley settlements and the larger market towns east of Iron Spire's territory. She was not hired for her strength or her connections. She was hired because she could assess the quality of a bolt of fabric in 30 seconds, could spot a bad dye lot by smell alone, and could negotiate a fair price with the calm, unintimidated manner of someone who had genuinely nothing left to lose. The merchant who hired her, a wide woman named Gossa with a permanent squint and an excellent memory for numbers, noticed her ability within the first week. "You've done this before," Gossa said one evening, watching Sadie sort through a disputed delivery of linen. "I taught myself," Sadie said. "I had time." Gossa said nothing further, but she began giving Sadie more responsibility. By the end of the first year, Sadie was managing the inventory of 3 wagons and negotiating directly with suppliers in 2 market towns. She slept in a small room above a tanner's workshop and spent her evenings studying the ledger books Gossa lent her, learning the language of trade, margins, losses, routes, seasonal fluctuations, the particular politics of which merchants controlled which roads and why. She sent word to Marin, as promised. Marin's replies were warm and regular and full of small news from the village. Bren had proposed. They were to be married in spring. The baker's eldest son had broken his arm falling from a cart. Cale Dawnmere and his lady Ashfall had wed in a ceremony at the castle and moved to the Northern Heights. That last piece of information Sadie read once, set aside, and never thought about again. The second year, she left Gossa's caravan, on good terms, with a genuine letter of recommendation and a small share of profit Gossa pressed into her hands at the parting, and moved further east to the city of Veldmere. It was larger than anything she had seen before, a true trading city built at the crossroads of 4 major routes, ringed by merchant guild halls and crowded with commerce from morning to night. She arrived with enough coin to rent a small stall in the lower market and enough knowledge to know exactly what she intended to do with it. She began with cloth. She knew cloth better than anything else in the world, how it was made, what it was worth, how to source it well and sell it better. She bought from smaller weavers who had quality goods, but no access to the larger markets, and sold to nobles' households and guild members who wanted fine fabric without the inflated prices of the established merchants. She kept her margins honest, her word reliable, and her accounts meticulous. Within 6 months, the stall had become a proper shop. Within a year, the shop had become 2 shops, and she had hired her first 2 workers, a former seamstress named Willa and a young man named Tobas, who had a gift for figures and an eagerness to learn that reminded her of herself at 17. By the end of the second year, she had a small but genuinely profitable trading operation, and a reputation in Veldmere's merchant circles as someone whose word meant exactly what it said. The third year was when everything changed scale. It began with a contract. A lord from the Eastern Highlands came to Veldmere seeking a reliable supplier for his household and garrison: cloth, leather goods, preserved provisions, tools. His previous supplier had failed him twice on delivery, and once on quality, and he was done with excuses. Someone in the merchant quarter directed him to Sadie. He was a practical man who asked direct questions. She gave him direct answers. When he asked why he should trust a young woman with no guild affiliation and no noble backing over any of the established merchants in the city, she opened her accounts ledger and set it on the table between them. "Because my numbers don't lie," she said, "and because I have never failed a delivery." He studied the ledger for several minutes. Then he looked up at her. "If you fail me once," he said, "we are finished." "Agreed," she said. She never failed him. The contract was fulfilled to the day and to the last item, 3 times running. The lord told 2 other Highland nobles about her. Those nobles told others. By the end of the 3rd year, Sadie's operation in Veldmere had expanded to include a warehouse, 8 permanent workers, and trade agreements with suppliers across 4 territories. She called it the Grey Mantle Company. The name came from nothing sentimental. It was the color of the storage cloth she used to protect fine fabric during transport, a practical gray that left no mark and kept no memory. She liked that. She liked the idea of building something whose identity was its reliability rather than its history. She moved out of the room above the tanner's workshop and into a proper house near the upper merchant quarter, not grand, but solid, with good stone walls and a courtyard and a kitchen large enough to warrant actually using. Willa had become her head seamstress and something close to a friend. Tobas had become her head of accounts and was training 2 younger clerks. She had a cook, a stable hand, and a guardsman named Edric, who had been a soldier in a northern pack war and was now the most effective deterrent to trouble she had ever employed. She worked long days and thought carefully and made good decisions more often than bad ones. And she realized one quiet evening in the 3rd year, sitting with a cup of herb tea in her courtyard and listening to the city settle into night. She was genuinely well. Not healed of everything, not without the particular scar that certain kinds of humiliation leave, regardless of how much time passes. But well, purposeful. Solid in herself in a way she had not been on that cold night 3 years ago, when she had pressed her back against a baker's stall and stared up at the winter sky. She had built something real. She had done it herself, step by step, with her own hands and her own mind. Nobody had given it to her, and nobody could take it from her. That was the thought she was sitting with when Edric appeared at the courtyard entrance with an expression she had not seen on him before. "There are riders at the gate," he said. "3 of them. They carry the Iron Wolf crest." Sadie set her cup down slowly. "Iron Spire," she said. It was not a question. "Aye." Edric's jaw was set. "They say they carry a message from the king." The courtyard was very quiet for a moment. Somewhere in the city, a bell marked the late hour. The coals in the small brazier near Sadie's chair gave a single soft breath of orange light. She had known, in some part of herself she never examined directly, that this moment would come eventually. She had not known what shape it would take. She had not known whether she would be ready for it. She found, with something that surprised her, that she was entirely calm. "Let them in," she said, "and stay close." The 3 riders wore the Iron Wolf crest on their tunics, black wool, silver thread, the mark of the king's personal messenger corps. They were not soldiers sent to intimidate. They were not nobles sent to negotiate. They were couriers, and couriers meant a letter, which meant that whatever Aidan Voss wanted from her, he had chosen words over presents. That told her something. Sadie received them in the front room of her house, standing behind the long oak table she used for meetings with suppliers and clients. She had not changed her clothes or adjusted her appearance in any deliberate way. She was dressed as she always dressed for late evening work, a plain dark tunic, her hair pinned back simply, her hands ink-stained from the accounts she had been reviewing before Edric interrupted her. She had decided, in the 30 seconds between the courtyard and the front room, that she was not going to perform anything for these men. Not nerves, not deference, not the careful smallness she had once worn in rooms where she felt she did not belong. The lead courier, a lean man of middle years with a soldier's posture and careful eyes, placed a sealed letter on the table before her. The seal was black wax, pressed with the Iron Wolf crest. "From His Majesty, Aidan Voss, Lycan King of Ironspire and the 3 territories," the man said formally. "He requests a response before we depart." "How long do I have?" "Until morning, my lady." She did not correct the title. She picked up the letter, broke the seal cleanly, and read it where she stood. It was not long. Aidan Voss, she was learning, did not use more words than a thing required. The letter said that the king was aware of the Greymantle Company and its operations in Veldmere and the surrounding territories. It said that Ironspire was in need of a reliable supplier for its garrison and noble households. The current arrangement had become unreliable, as current arrangements tended to do when the men running them grew complacent with their position. It said that the king's steward had reviewed the Greymantle Company's trade record and found it satisfactory. It offered a contract. The terms were written out in full. Quantities, schedules, payment structure, penalty clauses for failure on either side. It was a serious contract, written by someone who understood commerce well enough to know what mattered. The offer was fair, genuinely fair, not the kind of fair that concealed something unfavorable in the fine language. The payment terms were better than anything she currently held. At the bottom, in a hand slightly different from the formal body of the letter, less clerk, more personal, were 2 additional lines. The offer stands on its own merits. No prior acquaintance is assumed or required. A.V. Sadie read those 2 lines twice. Then she set the letter down on the table with the same care she used for important documents and looked at the lead courier. "Tell me," she said, "does the king know who owns the Greymantle Company?" The courier's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted slightly. "His Majesty is thorough in his inquiries, my lady," which meant yes. She was quiet for a moment. Edric stood near the door with his arms crossed, watching the couriers with the particular attention of a man who was politely prepared to remove people if necessary. Through the window, the city outside was dark and still. "Tell the king," Sadie said finally, "that I will have a written response ready by dawn." She did not sleep. She sat at her work table with the letter beside her and thought carefully for a long time. Not emotionally, but practically. The way she thought through every significant decision. She wrote out the considerations on a piece of paper in 2 columns the way Gassa had taught her. Reasons toward, reasons against. The reasons toward were straightforward. Iron Spire was the largest single territory in the region. A supply contract with the king's household and garrison would be the most significant agreement the Greymantle Company had ever held. It would provide stability, substantial revenue, and a level of credibility that would open doors with every other noble house and merchant guild she had not yet reached. On pure business terms, refusing it would be a significant mistake. The reasons against were not business reasons. They were personal, and she examined them honestly because she had learned that unexamined feelings made bad decisions. Going back to Iron Spire, even as a supplier, even as a businesswoman with her own leverage, meant returning to a place where she had once been invisible. It meant proximity to people and memories she had built a new life specifically to leave behind. And it meant eventually being in the same room as Aiden Voss, whose 2 quiet lines at the bottom of a business letter she was trying very hard not to think about. She looked at the reasons against column for a long time. Then she wrote her response. She accepted the contract on all stated terms with 2 additions of her own. A 6-month trial period, at the end of which either party could withdraw without penalty, and a clause specifying that all negotiations regarding the agreement would be conducted directly between herself and the king's steward, with no intermediaries who might complicate the arrangement. The additions were reasonable. They protected her position. Any sensible counterpart would accept them without argument. She sealed the letter herself and gave it to Edric to deliver to the couriers before dawn. Then she sat in the quiet of her house and thought about what she had just done, and felt, beneath the calm practicality of it, the faint and complicated sensation of something beginning to move. She arrived in Iron Spire 6 weeks later. She had taken the time to prepare properly, not because she was nervous, but because preparation was how she did everything. She sent Tobas ahead with a small advance team to establish a temporary warehouse in the merchant quarter of the city. She arranged accommodation at a reputable inn, rather than accepting the lodging the king's steward had offered, because she wanted her own ground to stand on. She brought Willa and Edric with her, and left the Veldmere operation in the hands of her 2 trained clerks, with detailed written instructions and a standing order to send word immediately if anything required her decision. Riding into Iron Spire for the first time in 3 years, she kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral, and did not allow herself to look too long at anything familiar. The village at the edge of the city, where her old house still stood. The road she had walked in darkness on the night she left. The outer walls of Iron Spire Castle rising above the rooftops, the Iron Wolf banners visible from half a mile away. It was smaller than she remembered. Or perhaps she was larger. It was difficult to say. Her first meeting with the king's steward, a meticulous older man named Aldrich, who communicated entirely in clipped, precise sentences, went efficiently. He reviewed her supply manifests without visible emotion, asked 3 sharp questions about delivery schedules, received her answers without comment, and concluded the meeting by informing her that the first delivery was expected in 14 days. She confirmed the date and left. She was walking back through the castle's outer courtyard, Edric at her shoulder and Willa slightly behind, when she heard her name. Not my lady, not Greymantle. Her name. Sadie. She turned. Aiden Voss stood near the entrance to the inner ward, alone, or nearly alone, 2 guards visible at a discreet distance behind him. He was dressed plainly for a king, dark wool and riding leathers, No ceremonial trappings. He looked exactly as she remembered him, and also somehow different. Or perhaps she was simply seeing him properly for the first time, without the haze of that terrible night around the edges of everything. He was watching her with that same expression she remembered from 3 years ago. Not pity, not performance. That quiet, settled recognition. She held his gaze and said nothing, waiting. "You built something significant," he said. It was not flattery. He said it the way someone states a fact they have verified personally. "Yes," she said. "The steward's report was thorough. He was impressed, which takes considerable doing." "I'm aware of my own record," she said. "I don't need it confirmed." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense. Something closer to the opposite. "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose you do." A silence settled between them that was not uncomfortable, in the way silences usually were between people who had history they had not addressed. It was simply a silence. He seemed entirely at ease inside it. "The contract terms were fair," she said finally. "I accepted them because they were fair. I want that understood." "It is understood," he said. "I'm here as a merchant. That's the full extent of it." "For now," he said very quietly, and the 2 words landed with a weight she did not entirely know what to do with. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she inclined her head, not deferentially, but as one party to an agreement acknowledging another, and walked on. Edric said nothing until they were well out of the courtyard. Then quietly, "That was the king." "I know who it was," Sadie said. "He knows your name." "He's thorough in his inquiries," she said. "Someone told me that recently." Edric was quiet for another moment. "Should I be concerned?" Sadie thought about 2 lines written in a hand slightly different from the formal body of a letter. She thought about for now, spoken quietly in an empty courtyard. "Not yet," she said, "but stay close." The first delivery went without a flaw. Sadie had made certain of it personally, walking the warehouse floor the night before with a torch in one hand and her manifest in the other, checking every bolt of cloth, every sealed crate of preserved provisions, every bundle of leather goods against the written order. Tobas followed behind her with his ledger, noting corrections where she found them. A mislabeled crate here, a short count there, nothing significant, all fixed before morning. When the wagons rolled through the castle gate at first light, every item was present, every quality was as specified, every seal was intact. Aldrich received the delivery with the same clipped efficiency he brought to everything. He checked 3 items at random against his own list, found them correct, and signed the receipt without comment. As close to approval as the man apparently came. The second delivery 2 weeks later went the same way. By the third delivery, word had begun to move through the castle household in the way that word always moved through enclosed communities. Quietly, thoroughly, and faster than anyone officially acknowledged. The king's stores were reliably stocked for the first time in over a year. The garrison cook had stopped filing complaints about short provisions. The noble households receiving cloth had stopped sending back returns. Small things, but in the management of a large castle, small things accumulated into something significant. Sadie heard most of this secondhand, through Willa, who had a gift for gathering information from other people's servants, without appearing to try. She filed it away without comment and focused on the work. She had settled into a rhythm in Iron Spire that she was careful to keep orderly. Days were for the warehouse and the accounts. Evenings were for correspondence. Letters to her suppliers in Veldmere, reports from her clerks, the ongoing negotiations with 2 additional noble houses who had approached her after the king's contract became known in the merchant quarter. She took her meals at the inn, spoke to people when business required it, and maintained the particular self-contained composure that had become, over 3 years, as natural to her as breathing. She did not seek out Aidan Voss. She did not avoid him either. Avoidance was its own kind of performance, and she had decided she was done performing things. When she encountered him in the castle's outer areas during deliveries, she acknowledged him with the same direct courtesy she used for everyone, and continued with her work. He, for his part, did not press. He appeared occasionally in the spaces she moved through, the outer courtyard, the corridor outside Aldrich's office, once near the castle's main gate, when she was overseeing the unloading of a particularly large order. And he watched her with that steady, undemonstrative attention that she had stopped trying to categorize and simply accepted as a feature of his presence. He spoke when he had something to say, and did not speak when he didn't. She found, against her own expectation, that she preferred this to the elaborate social performances most powerful men felt obligated to put on. It was in the 4th week that she encountered Cale Dawnmere. She had known it would happen eventually. Iron Spire was not large enough to prevent it indefinitely, and the Dawnmere family still held their position in the castle hierarchy. Cale's father remained High Steward, which meant Cale himself moved through the same corridors she did. She saw him first. He was crossing the main hall with 2 other men, deep in conversation, dressed well in a burgundy tunic she vaguely remembered. Or perhaps it was a different one. She had no way to know. He looked the same. A little older, perhaps. The same easy carriage, the same handsome, untroubled face. He looked up and saw her. The conversation he was having stopped mid-sentence. Sadie held his gaze for exactly the length of time it took to confirm that she had seen him and was entirely unaffected by the seeing. And then she looked back down at the manifest in her hands and continued reading. She heard him cross the hall toward her. "Sadie." His voice had the careful quality of someone choosing their footing on uncertain ground. "Cale," she said, without looking up. A pause. "You've come back." "I'm here on business." She turned a page of the manifest. "Is there something you needed?" Another pause, longer. She could feel him working through something. Surprise, she thought. And something more complicated underneath it that she did not particularly want to examine on his behalf. That was his work to do, not hers. "You look well," he said finally. The words had the sound of a man who had intended to say something else, and change course at the last moment. "I am well," she said simply. "I heard about your company. The Grey Mantle. It's become quite considerable." "Yes." "I didn't know you had it in you," he said, and she could tell by the way he said it that he meant it as a compliment, that he had no awareness at all of what those words sounded like. She looked up at him then, directly, clearly, without heat or bitterness, simply with the full, level attention of a woman who had long since finished grieving anything connected to this man. "I know," she said. "That was the problem." She closed the manifest, tucked it under her arm, and walked on. She did not hear whether he responded. She did not turn around to check. Behind her, she heard Edric's steady footsteps, and nothing else. And she felt, for the first time since returning to Ironspire, something that had been faintly braced inside her chest release quietly and settle. That evening, there was a knock at her inn door. It was not Edric. Edric knocked differently, 3 times with the blunt side of his fist. This was 2 knocks, unhurried. She opened the door. Aidan Voss stood in the corridor, alone. No guards, no attendants, no ceremony. He had clearly come on his own decision and without announcement. "I saw the exchange in the hall," he said, before she could speak. "I'm not here because of it. I want to be clear about that." Sadie leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and looked at him steadily. "Then why are you here?" "Because I've been trying to find the right time to say something for 4 weeks," he said, "and I've concluded there isn't a right time, so I'm saying it now." She waited. "3 years ago, in the Great Hall," he said, "I saw what happened. I saw you hold yourself together and walk out with more dignity than most warriors I know could have managed. And I saw something else. Something I couldn't explain clearly to myself at the time. something that didn't have anything to do with what Dawnmere did or didn't do. "What did you see?" she asked. Her voice was quiet and even. "Someone who was entirely themselves," he said. "In a room full of people performing versions of themselves for each other's benefit. You were just you, even in the worst moment of the evening. Especially then." The corridor was very still. Somewhere below, the inn's common room murmured with distant conversation. Firelight. The ordinary sounds of evening. "You spoke 2 lines in a business letter," she said. "I've been thinking about them longer than I intended to." Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the careful stillness of a man trying not to show how much a thing mattered to him. "Which 2 lines?" "You know which ones." A pause. Then quietly, "Yes." "Why did you write them?" "Because I wanted you to know," he said, "that what I was offering had nothing to do with what happened in that hall. That I wasn't offering you anything out of guilt or pity or the desire to correct someone else's mistake. I wanted you to come back, if you came back, as yourself. Not as someone who owed me something, and not as someone I owed something. Just as yourself." Sadie was quiet for a long moment. She looked at him the way she looked at important things, carefully, without rushing, taking in what was actually there rather than what she expected or feared to find. What was there was a man who was telling her something true. She had enough experience now, enough years of reading people across negotiating tables, to know the difference between performance and honesty. This was honesty. Uncomfortable and plainly offered. The way honesty usually was when it came from someone who wasn't accustomed to needing to explain themselves. "I'm not the woman who left this city," she said finally. "I want that understood clearly." "I know," he said. "That's not who I'm standing here talking to. I'm not looking for rescue. I'm not looking to belong to someone else's story. I built my own." "I know that too," he said. "I read the contract terms you sent back. Both additions were correct. I accepted them without argument." Despite everything, despite all the careful composure she had been maintaining for 4 weeks and 3 years before that, she felt something shift at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. "That was a business decision," she said. "So was mine," he said. "Mostly." The corridor held its quiet around them. Through the small window at the end of the hall, the winter sky above Spire was the same deep blue-black it had been on the night she left, scattered with the same cold stars, indifferent and unchanging. She had stood under that sky once, with nothing but a green cloak and a decision. She had considerably more now. "I don't know what this is," she said carefully. "I'm not prepared to name it or promise anything about it." "Neither am I," Aiden said. "I'm not asking you to." "Then we understand each other." "We do," he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she stepped back from the doorframe. "Good night," she said. The same word she had said to him 3 years ago in the Great Hall, in an entirely different life. "Good night, Sadie," he said, and turned and walked back down the corridor with that unhurried, unperforming ease that was, she was beginning to understand, simply who he was. She closed the door quietly and stood in the center of her room for a long time, listening to the city outside and the sound of her own steady breathing. Then she went back to her accounts. Winter deepened over Spire in the weeks that followed, and Sadie let things move at their own pace. That was the decision she made, consciously and without drama, on the morning after Aiden's visit to the inn corridor. She was not going to force clarity onto something that did not yet have a clear shape. She was not going to retreat from it either, building walls out of old caution the way she might have done 3 years ago. She was simply going to let it be what it was and pay attention. What it was, in practical terms, was this. The king began finding reasons to be present in spaces she occupied, and she stopped pretending not to notice. He joined her once in Aldrich's office when she arrived for a routine meeting, sitting at the side of the table rather than the head of it, asking questions about her supply routes with the focused curiosity of someone who actually wanted to understand the answers. He appeared at the warehouse one afternoon, when she was overseeing a new delivery, looked at the organization of the storage system she had established, and said, without preamble, that it was more efficient than anything the castle had used before, and he intended to have his household staff learn from it. She told him Tobas had designed most of it. He said he would like to meet Tobas. Tobas, when informed of this, went briefly pale, and then composed himself with admirable speed. They walked together once, not by arrangement, but because they were both leaving the castle's inner ward at the same time one gray afternoon, and neither of them turned in a different direction. They walked along the upper wall that overlooked the valley below Iron Spire, the bare winter trees stretching to the horizon, frost on the stone beneath their boots. He talked about the territories, not in the performing way of someone demonstrating power, but in the way of someone thinking through a problem aloud with a person they trusted to listen usefully. A dispute between two border packs, a question of trade routes, a decision that had no clean answer. She listened. She asked two questions that apparently cut to the center of the problem more directly than he had expected, because he stopped walking and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. "Where did you learn to think like that?" he asked. 3 years of making decisions with real consequences, she said. You learn to find the center of a problem quickly when being wrong costs you something actual. He was quiet for a moment. Most people in my council have never had to do that. I know, she said. I could tell, from the contract terms. He laughed. A real one. Brief and unguarded, and she felt it land somewhere in her chest in a way she chose not to examine too carefully while they were standing on a wall in the cold. It was Willa who said what no one else had said directly. They were in the warehouse one evening, the two of them alone, doing the final count on an outgoing order. Willa had been with her long enough to say things other people didn't. He looks at you, Willa said, not looking up from her counting. The way men in stories look at women. The real stories, I mean, not the ones where the woman is decoration. I'm aware, Sadie said, and you look at him. I'm also aware of that. Willa was quiet for a moment. Are you going to do something about it? I'm thinking, Sadie said. You've been thinking for 6 weeks. I think carefully. Willa made a sound that conveyed an entire opinion without requiring words. Sadie set down her manifest and looked at the wall for a moment. I left this city with nothing, she said. I built everything I have by myself, step by step, with no one to fall back on. I am not willing to put that at risk for something that turns out to be inconstant. He's the Lycan King, Willa said. He could have any woman in 4 territories. I know. He's been walking along walls in the cold with you. I know that too, Sadie. Willa's voice was gentle but direct. Protecting yourself from something that hasn't hurt you yet is just being afraid with extra steps. Sadie looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her manifest again. Finish the count, she said. But something in her had shifted, and Willa, who knew her well enough to read the difference, smiled at the inventory sheet and said nothing further. She went to him. Not that evening. She was not impulsive, and she had a full day of work the following morning that required her to be mentally present. But 2 days later, in the late afternoon when the castle was quiet and the light through the high windows was the low gold of winter sun, she sent a message to Aldrich asking whether the king had time for a brief meeting regarding the contract. Aldrich's reply came back within the hour. The king would receive her in the map room at the top of the east tower. The map room was exactly what it sounded like. A round, high-ceilinged chamber with a large wooden table in its center, covered in territorial maps. The walls hung with more of the same, everything annotated in small, Precise handwriting she was beginning to recognize as his. Iron braziers in the corners kept the space warm. Through the tall, narrow windows, the valley below Iron Spire was visible in every direction, the kind of view that made the world look comprehensible. He was standing at the table when she entered, studying a map of the eastern border. He looked up. She crossed the room, stopped on the opposite side of the table, and looked at him directly. "I didn't actually come about the contract," she said. "I know," he said. "Aldrich told me the contract has no outstanding issues. I came to tell you something." He waited, giving her exactly the space she needed, the way he always did. "I came back to Iron Spire because the business terms were sound," she said. "That's still true. But it's not the only reason I've stayed as long as I have, and I think we both know that. And I think pretending otherwise is a waste of time that neither of us has to spare." He was very still in the way that she had learned meant he was paying complete attention. "I'm not the same person who left this city," she continued. "I don't need protecting. I don't need rescuing. I don't need someone to give me a place in the world because I already have one that I built myself. What I might possibly want is something different. Someone who sees that and doesn't need to diminish it to feel comfortable. Someone who asks questions because he actually wants to understand the answers." She paused. "Someone who accepts contract additions that are reasonable without making it a negotiation about power." The corner of his mouth moved. "I accept reasonable additions," he said. "I've noticed." He came around the side of the table slowly, without pressure, stopping at a distance that was close without being presumptuous. "I've known since the night you walked out of the Great Hall," he said quietly, "that you were someone worth knowing. I didn't have the right to say that then. I'm not certain I've earned the right now. But I would like to, if you'll allow it." "That," Sadie said, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 years. I mean it. I know you do." She held his gaze. "Don't make me a promise you're not certain you can keep." "I don't make promises I'm not certain of," he said. "Ask anyone who served under me." "I already did," she said. "I asked Aldrich." He stared at her. "You asked my steward about my character." "I told you. I think carefully." She paused. "He said, and I'm quoting directly, 'The king's word has never once required a correction,' which I found satisfactory. Aiden Voss, Lycan King of Iron Spire and the 3 territories, looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, and would later decide was the closest thing to undone that a man like him was capable of appearing. "Sadie," he said, and the way he said her name, simple, certain, like something recognized rather than discovered, made her chest do the thing she had been carefully not acknowledging for 6 weeks. "Don't make it sentimental," she said. "I wouldn't dare," he said. And then, quietly, with the same unperforming directness he brought to everything, "Stay." Not a command, not an appeal. A request from someone who understood the difference between asking and requiring, and had chosen asking. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had watched her walk out of a hall 3 years ago with more dignity than she had felt, who had written 2 honest lines at the bottom of a business letter, who had walked along a cold wall with her, and listened to her think and laughed a real laugh and accepted every term she had offered, without turning it into a contest. "I'll consider it," she said. His expression told her he understood that. From her, that was a yes. She did stay. Not immediately, not without structure. Sadie did not do anything without structure. She and Aiden spent the remainder of the winter in the careful, honest process of 2 people learning each other properly, without performance and without rush. She kept her rooms at the inn for another month, maintaining the independence that was not stubbornness but principle, and he never once suggested she should give it up before she was ready. She was ready in early spring. The Greymantle Company's Iron Spire warehouse became a permanent establishment, with Tobus managing the local operations and 2 new workers hired from the city. The Veldmere operation continued under her trained clerks and flourished. Letters from Maren arrived regularly, full of warmth and the particular satisfaction of a younger sister who had been right about something and was too kind to say so directly. The formal bond between Sadie and Aiden was announced to the court on a morning in late spring, in the same great hall where everything had once fallen apart. There was no grand ceremony planned in advance, no elaborate performance. Aiden simply stood before his court, and his nobles and his pack, and stated, in the direct and unhurried way he stated everything, that he had chosen his mate. Not because she was noble, not because of politics or alliance, but because she was someone whose mind and character and courage he had recognized and admired, and would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of. Sadie stood beside him in a gown of deep green, not the careful green of a woman trying to be worthy of a room, but the settled green of a woman who had long since decided she was. She had made this one herself as well. Across the hall, she saw Cale Dawnmere standing with the assembled nobles, and she watched him understand, in real time, what he had dismissed 3 years ago, in a garden, when he had chosen ease over truth. She did not feel satisfaction about it. She did not feel much of anything about it at all, which was, she realized, the cleanest possible proof that she was healed. The High Steward, Cale's father, began a formal announcement of congratulation that Sadie stopped hearing after the first sentence because Aiden had quietly taken her hand. Not for the room, not as a display, simply as a fact. And she was paying attention to that instead. Maren came for the ceremony, arriving with Bren and a traveling case she had clearly overpacked, and a face so full of emotion that Sadie had to look away briefly, or lose her own composure. They held each other in the corridor before the proceedings, the way they had held each other in a small house a long time ago, and Maren pressed her face into Sadie's shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right. What remained of that life afterward was not a story of rescue or redemption. It was simpler and truer than that. The Greymantle Company continued to grow for many years, becoming the most significant trading operation in the region under Sadie's direct oversight. She kept her own seat in every negotiation, her own name on every contract, her own accounts in her own hand. Aiden never suggested otherwise. He had known who she was when he asked her to stay, and he had meant it. They argued occasionally, as people with strong minds and genuine respect for each other will do, and resolved those arguments with the same directness they brought to everything else. They made decisions together, about the territories, about trade policy, about the 6 significant problems that arose every year in a large and complicated kingdom, and Sadie's counsel, which cut to the center of problems with the precision of someone who had spent years making decisions with real consequences, became something his advisors quietly began to rely on without acknowledging they were doing it. In the 2nd year of their bond, a child was born, a daughter, small and dark-haired, and already, at a few hours old, regarding the world with a settled, considering expression that made Aiden look at Sadie and say nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Sadie looked at her daughter, and at the man beside her, and at the life she had built. Not been given, not rescued into, but built, stone by stone, with her own hands and her own mind, and then chosen to share with someone who had been worth the choosing. She thought briefly of a green cloak sewn from the last of her mother's good wool, and a cold road east, and a sky full of indifferent stars, and a girl who had decided to leave and never need any of them. That girl had been right to leave. And she had been right to come back. Not for the hall, not for the title, not for any of the things that had once seemed like the point. For this. Exactly this. The story of Sadie of the Greymantle Company, who had walked out of a hall with nothing but her dignity, built an empire in the East, and returned on her own terms to a man who had waited, patiently and honestly, for exactly that, was finished. It had ended the only way a story like hers could, not with a rescue, but with a choice. Hers.